All eyes will be on 300 prospects working out at the NFL Combine, but a lot more goes down during this week in Indianapolis. Can we expect any major moves from John Schneider and the Seahawks? I'm going to be breaking it all down here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in, whether you're tuning in from nearby Bellevue, Washington, or down in Anderson, Indiana, near the NFL Combine. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The NFL Combine officially set to kick off tomorrow at Lucas Oil Stadium in the Indianapolis Convention Center. Going to be player interviews and, of course, workouts incoming at the stadium. Some call it the Underwear Olympics. Going to be taking a deep dive into some of the moves that could happen behind the scenes for the Seahawks and company. Plus, going to be taking a deep dive into some personnel fits, both on offense and defense. Today, it's all about offensive and defensive linemen to watch in Indianapolis. This episode is brought your way by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now for your lead story here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. The NFL Combine officially kicking off in Indianapolis on Tuesday. Already have plenty of exciting storylines coming out of Indianapolis with coaches and prospects incoming off their flights on Monday. Looking at the Combine, of course, obviously this week is mostly going to draw attention, at least from fans, for the 300-plus prospects that are in town looking to make themselves some money, improving their draft stock, on-field workouts. You get the interviews going on with teams. Medicals may be the most important part that's going on for prospects as teams look at their medical evaluations, dictates where they're going to be picked. But behind the scenes, maybe the most important things that happened this entire week have nothing to do with the prospects that are working out here in Indianapolis. This is a really busy week for all 32 NFL teams, whether it's negotiations with their own free agents. Yes, there's a legal tampering period, but NFL GMs, they're talking to agents about outside free agents this week. They are getting set for the start of free agency early March. And also you've got extensions, you've got cap casualties, all kinds of negotiations going on behind the scenes for adding and taking away players as teams try to get their salary cap situations cleaned up before the start of the new league year. And this has been a really big time for John Schneider and the Seahawks to make moves, whether it's been trading for or trading away players. It's been restructures, extensions, you name it. This has been a really busy time of year for John Schneider beyond just improving the big board and trying to find prospects for the draft. Obviously, that is still one of the big deals going on this week, and that's why the Combine exists. But there's a lot of discussions going on behind closed doors that have to do with NFL veterans, free agency, contract discussions, all kinds of stuff. And when you look at the track record for John Schneider, this has been a really busy time of year for him as far as moves have been made. And this is going back to 2012 when we really started to see splashy moves happening during or right after the Combine. You go all the way back to 2012, Marcus Trufant and Marshawn Lynch being the big players there. Lynch getting extension. Marcus Trufant was released. Interestingly, Trufant did come back for the 2012 season under a cheaper contract. The following season, there's that trade for Percy Harvin that did play a big role in the Super Bowl. So let's not act like that trade didn't have any benefit to the Seahawks. But obviously, they only got a handful of games before they traded Harvin to the Jets, had injury issues, locker room issues. Red Bryant being cut in 2014, Jimmy Graham trade in 2015. That happened shortly after the Combine. The framework for that deal happened at the NFL Combine. And there's been plenty of other big moves. Richard Sherman getting cut in 2018. That happened just a couple of days after the NFL Combine. You fast forward a few years to 2022. That was the most eventful combine week for the Seahawks. Everybody may remember Pete Carroll telling reporters in Indianapolis that the Seahawks did not have intentions of trading Russell Wilson. A couple of days later, they traded him to the Denver Broncos. They also released Bobby Wagner. The framework for all of these moves, it happened in Indianapolis. And even in 2023, just a couple of years ago, the framework for Geno Smith's current contract, the 3-year, $75 million deal that he signed, that framework was negotiated and built during the NFL Combine week with John Schneider and Geno Smith's agent hashing this out. And then a few days after the Combine ended, the deal was announced. So these don't just magically, these contracts, these trades, they don't just magically pop up on March 8th. There is a lot of groundwork that is done during this week. And when you look at the Seahawks currently, there's plenty of moves that could be made or facilitated. They might happen this week. They might not be announced till early next week, middle next week, but there's going to be a lot of moves that are going to be set in motion this week. You can talk about cap casualties. Obviously, Draymond Jones and Tyler Lockett being the two biggest names. Maybe Uchenna Nwosu can be thrown into that hat as well, with his roster bonus for February 14th reportedly getting pushed back. The Seahawks clearly are thinking about some things on that front with his contract. But those three players, there's a few others that you could talk about: Rayshon Jenkins, George Fant, Roy Robertson Harris, where the Seahawks can create cap space by releasing those players. I am assuming that there are discussions going on behind the scenes for at least a few of those players about restructures, trying to figure out a way to lower the cap hit and keep some of these guys on the roster. And if they can't hash an agreement out, then that's when you have to go to the release button and you start setting some of these guys free. And players like Tyler Lockett, who have been iconic franchise leaders for a long time, you obviously don't want to lose those kind of players, but diminishing returns production-wise, a $30+ million cap hit, that's not tenable. If he's going to be back in the Seahawks uniform, the contract has to have work done to it. So when is that work going to be done? It's going to be done behind the scenes here at the Combine. And then when you look at extensions, Geno Smith a couple years ago signed that 3-year extension. Maybe the same thing happens after this week in Indianapolis. There's going to be discussions ongoing there. It seems like it's a matter of when, not if, when we're talking about Geno Smith getting a contract extension. But just like a couple years ago, a lot of that groundwork is going on right now. I can guarantee that there's discussions going on between John Schneider and Geno Smith's agent trying to hash that out. And maybe in the next few weeks, we will see that contract be revealed and Geno Smith will have his extension with the Seattle Seahawks. DK Metcalf, maybe they're going to wait a little longer on him. They didn't sign him to his last extension until early in training camp. But I would think with the salary cap situation, that would be something the Seahawks would be proactive with, maybe trying to get him extended to lower his cap hit for this season. And as far as other extension candidates, the Seahawks have their 2022 draft class now. They are eligible for extension. So that includes Rick Woolen, Ken Walker III, Boye Mafe, Charles Cross, Abraham Lucas, all of those impact rookies at one point, that impact 2022 draft class. They have had some injuries in that group, but they've had some really strong performances from that group as well. There may be a handful of players there that John Schneider is thinking, look, we're going to be aggressive right now. Let's try to get a few of these extensions hammered out. Let's get these guys new contracts, and they're going to be long-term parts of our roster here in Seattle. And so I can envision that potentially coming out of this combine that one or two of those players, maybe a Rick Woolen or maybe Charles Cross, instead of getting the 5th-year option, let's just get him extended now. Who knows what the Seahawks are going to end up doing? But I would expect there's going to be quite a few fireworks. And there have been reports out there that GMs are going to be more aggressive than ever with the salary cap jumping as much as it is right now. The GMs are going to be really aggressive, particularly with this free agent class, maybe not being the best that we've seen. Teams are going to be aggressive. They're going to be proactive, trying to re-sign their own young players and get them inked up for 3-4 years. I think John Schneider is going to be trying to do that behind the scenes as well. So there's all kinds of moving parts. There's a lot going on, whether it's talking cap casualties, extensions, there's trade discussions that could be going on as well. With all of these talks getting juggled, there's a lot of things going on, at these hotels, at these restaurants, at these bars here in Indianapolis that is just as important, if not more important, than what's going on at Lucas Oil Stadium. It is one of the most important weeks of the entire calendar year for NFL franchises, and for the Seahawks, it's no different. I would expect there's going to be plenty of fireworks that are becoming. Maybe it doesn't get announced this week, but there's going to be a lot of that framework for the big moves coming in the next couple of weeks. It is happening right now in Indianapolis. When we come back, it's time to talk personnel fits for this 2024 draft class heading into the combine. Going to be discussing some offensive linemen to watch here in Indianapolis who could be good scheme fits in Clint Kubiak's offense. We'll get to that coming up next here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by our friends over at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get into the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three. I never feel like I've missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in, and thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The NFL Combine going to be officially underway in Indianapolis tomorrow. 300-plus prospects descending on the Circle City for workouts, interviews, and medicals. You've also got plenty of coaches as well as executives. They're going to be here in Indianapolis, one of the biggest weeks on the NFL calendar. Let's talk personnel fits for the Seahawks. And obviously on offense, there's going to be some differences in terms of the personnel that Clint Kubiak's going to be looking to add to the roster compared to what Ryan Grubb, the former offensive coordinator for the Seahawks, wanted, particularly the offensive line. I think you're going to see a shift in the type of players that the Seahawks are going to be looking for in this offense that's going to be much more zone-centric, being from the Mike Shanahan tree. Clint Kubiak is going to have a zone-centric offense, particularly the wide zone being emphasized. And so I think you have to look at the athletic metrics, the lateral quickness, the ability to reach on blocks. Those are going to be crucial for what the Seahawks are looking for. They're looking for excellent zone blockers. The good news is this draft class has a lot of really good fits for the Seahawks from first round all the way to the end of the draft, potentially. And even maybe a player or two that isn't here in Indianapolis that would be worth mentioning. I want to start with the tackle position. We're talking offensive linemen. I know that Charles Cross and Abraham Lucas are both still on the roster. The Seahawks don't have to be overly aggressive trying to add tackles, but at the same time, Abe Lucas had injury issues. He's going to the last year of his contract. Charles Cross, he's been good, but has he been great? Not necessarily. So you still have some questions long-term there potentially. There's also some tackles in this draft class that could be good guard converts potentially. When you start this discussion at the tackle positions, you got to start off with Armand Membo from Missouri. And he's maybe one of the 2 or 3 players that I am most intrigued to watch work out here in Indianapolis, because we're talking about a big offensive lineman that has really light feet. And I want to see what the athletic testing looks like, particularly the 10-yard split, the 3-cone, the short shuttle. I want to see how well Membo, his testing, I want to see how well he ends up producing here in Indianapolis. The same can be said for Cameron Williams from Texas. I'm not as high on Williams as I am Membo when you're watching the tape, particularly in pass protection. There were some major issues, especially against top competition in the college football playoff. He's had penalty issues, but Cameron Williams is one of the best zone blocking offensive linemen in all of college football. He has those light feet, the plus lateral mobility. He checks off those boxes. There's physicality as well. he is a better run blocker than pass protector at this point, in my opinion. Is there room for him to become a good pass protector? Absolutely. But both those players have a chance to be gone in the first 20 to 25 picks in this draft. Two of the top tackles. Williams may be the one of those two that has a chance to slide a little bit more, just again, because there's a little bit more uneven film on him. As far as tackles I'm going to be watching that could be available in later stages of the draft. If you're looking at day 2, Josh Connerly Jr. from Oregon, he infamously had a clip from the Senior Bowl where he just got absolutely bulldozed, and it went viral, and everybody was saying Josh Connerly, not an NFL prospect, or this play shows he's not going to be able to handle it. If you were in Mobile, though, most of the week, Josh Connerly was drawing rave reviews. And this guy, again, another athletic tackle that I think could play guard if he needed to in a pinch, that has the ability to be able to zone block at a high level, was one of the top zone blocking tackles in all of college football, according to Pro Football Focus. You watch the film, he can do the gap scheme stuff as well, but this is a really good fit for him in Clint Kubiak's offense. And on day 3, I think that there's value to be had. And this is probably where the Seahawks are going to be looking at tackle, not in the first round, even though there's some pretty intriguing guys in the first round that could be worth it as best player available. But you look at 2 guys in particular that are going to be working out here in Indianapolis. Brandon Crenshaw-Dickson from Florida. He was at San Diego State the first 3 years of his career. He transfers to Florida this year, had a really strong season in pass protection, but he also was one of the top zone blocking tackles in all of college football. This is a really athletic player that at times has had issues with his leverage because he's 6'7". He is a taller offensive lineman, but still he is athletic. I think this scheme fits him better than a gap scheme where he's getting downhill because he has plus athletic traits. Crenshaw-Dickson also brings the pass protection track record. So he is somebody early to mid day 3 that I think would make a lot of sense for the Seahawks. He might be a fast riser if he has a strong combine. And then Charles Grant from William and Mary, we got to have that FCS prospect. This might be the best draft that I have ever seen for offensive linemen from the FCS level. There's going to be a couple others I'm going to mention, but this kid, Charles Grant, is a really athletic tackle that was at the Senior Bowl. He might be another one that if he tests really well here in Indianapolis, sneaks up into the early day 3, maybe even into day 2 discussion, because he had a really good week in Mobile against top competition after playing at the FCS level. Grant is another player that I think checks off the athletic trait boxes and also brings the high IQ that Clint Kubiak wants from his offensive linemen. When we slide to the guard spots, this is the biggest issue the Seahawks have in their offensive line, in my opinion. And I know that Clint Kubiak mentioned he wants an elite center. We'll talk centers here in a second, but guard to me is the most important position that the Seahawks have got to address going into the 2025 season. And this draft class has some intriguing guys that could be plugged in. As far as scheme fits go, I love Tyler Booker from Alabama, and I think he would be a really good pick at number 18. With it being said, I don't know that stylistically that he is the best scheme fit if you're looking for Clint Kubiak's offense. Donovan Jackson from Ohio State would actually be the player that I would top off, that I'm really excited to see here at the Combine. Jackson played tackle out of necessity for Ohio State last year. He struggled his first game or two, and then he figured it out. And that is something that really excites me because you could see the athleticism that you need to be able to handle going against top-tier Big Ten edge rushers. Jackson was able to make that adjustment, and he had the physical tools to do it. I like this kid a lot as a guard prospect coming into the NFL, and I think he's got a chance to maybe be a early day 2, late day 1 selection, depending on what happens in Indianapolis. But he's certainly a guy to keep a close eye on, and maybe the fastest riser in this entire draft process, at least for fans. Maybe already was a known commodity going into the Senior Bowl for draft experts, but Gray Zabel from North Dakota State. I don't know that there is a more natural fit in this draft class for Clint Kubiak's offense. There's first round buzz around this kid now, and when I turned on the North Dakota State tape last week, you could see why. This kid is such a natural mover, particularly when it comes to lateral movement skills. He also brings a lot of physicality. He's played tackle. He's played guard. He even did some snaps at center at the Senior Bowl. So you're talking about a really versatile player. I just think that this is a guy that Right now, I would be surprised if he doesn't get picked in the first round and maybe mid-first round because of where he's at. If he has a strong combine and tests well, has good interviews with teams, I think you can lock him up for the first round. But I would not be surprised if the Seahawks were a team that we're looking at him when we're intrigued. And they don't have a history of drafting FCS guys, but North Dakota State has kicked out a lot of NFL talent. And I think that narrative is changing. Again, this is the best FCS draft class I've seen for offensive linemen. There's a lot of really good blockers in this draft class coming from the FCS level. And Gray Zabel, to me, would be the headliner. And when you're looking at potential day 3 selections, Clay Webb from Jacksonville State, I thought he was going to come out last year, former 5-star recruit at Georgia. He was one of the top 8 zone blocking guards in all of college football, according to Pro Football Focus. You turn on the tape, you can see why he was a 5-star recruit. Just incredibly nimble for a player of his size. And you don't see guys like that at the guard position very often. He clearly has tackle athleticism, but he's got a lot of the skill sets that you need to play guard. I think he would be a great fit in a wide zone offense. Marcus Mbow from Purdue. This is a player that's kind of hovering under the radar because Purdue had a horrible season, but they've actually got a couple pretty good offensive line prospects. And I think Bo is one that you have to watch closely going into this combine because another one that was really highly regarded in zone blocking, it was as a tackle at Purdue. I look at his length and I think he is a guard in the NFL, but I think those skills that you see at the tackle position on zone blocking, they are going to be even more impressive at the guard spot. I can see him as an early day 3 selection for the Seahawks. And one that isn't getting a lot of buzz that I like, that I'm curious to see how he tests. This could really be one of the players that has a chance to earn a lot of money this week if he tests well. That's Connor Colby from Iowa. If you've watched the Hawkeyes over the years, they do such a good job of developing NFL talent. They don't always get 4- and 5-star recruits, but they turn 3 stars and 2 stars into NFL prospects. Connor Colby has been one of the anchors for Iowa's run game. And even when they haven't had a big-time offense, which most years they don't, this is not a team that's going to light up scoreboards, but they typically have a really strong run game. Connor Colby was one of the top zone blocking guards in all of college football the last 2 seasons. Not the biggest guy, but he moves really well. He's got a firm first punch. There's a lot to like about his game. I want to see what athleticism translates in terms of testing this week in Indianapolis. But Colby is another one on day 3 to keep an eye on. And last but not least, again, I mentioned this, that Clint Kubiak talked about the need for an elite center. I don't think that this is a great center draft class. Tackle and guard positions are really good. Center, not so much. With that being said, there are a few guys I think that are worth watching this week that could make sense for the Seahawks if they don't want to go and get a free agent center to try to plug that hole. I think there are a few guys that are at least worth a look at the center position. And we're going to start with Jared Wilson from Georgia. The Bulldogs, another one of those programs that is a blue blood. They kick out a lot of really good players. Wilson is one of those prospects that if you go back and you watch the tape, Georgia's run game, a lot of it was leaning on his ability to be able to get out in space and make plays on defenders in the blocking game. Wilson is a really good move center, and I think that's a great fit in a zone scheme. Jonah Monheim from USC, he's more of an all-around center. I don't think he is great at any one thing, but he's really good at everything. Look at him as a day 2, early day 3 selection. Drew Kendall from Boston College, interesting that he is the son of Pete Kendall, who was a first-round selection for the Seattle Seahawks in the late 90s. So there's some history there, Seahawks franchise with the Kendall family. This is another player. He's under 300 pounds, a little bit smaller, but very high football IQ, multi-year starter at Boston College, played for Bill O'Brien last year, so he's played in a pro-style offense. I think that his athleticism and his strengths fit in best with a team that's going to run a lot of zone. And obviously the IQ, that is something that Clint Kubiak has already emphasized that he's looking for. So I think early day 3 that Drew Kendall from Boston College is another player to watch. And somebody that I'm not going to get a chance to see this week that I wanted to mention, Jacob Gideon from Western Michigan. When I've been turning on the tape, again, I don't think this is a great center class, but Jacob Gideon at 295 pounds, another player that's on the small end of the spectrum, But man, this guy, he moves like a tight end. Like, he is really athletic, gets out in space. His ability to reach 3 techs and to reach 1 tech in the backside, he's as good as anybody in this draft class at that. And MAC players have a history of being really good in the NFL, particularly offensive linemen. I think that Gideon is somebody that should be on the radar that is kind of in dark horse territory right now. I think he's somebody to keep an eye on. We won't get to see him at the combine because he didn't get an invite, but I will certainly be watching Western Michigan's pro day because Gideon is a guy that I think could be a day 3 prospect in a not very deep center class. He's one of the better centers that would fit Clint Kubiak's scheme. Up next, I'm going to flip the script. We're going to go to the other side of the trenches, defensive line. Who fits Mike Macdonald's scheme that could potentially be a draft target and is worth watching this week in Indianapolis? Going to get to that up next here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Welcome back to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks to all the 12s who are listening, and thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Combine week is upon us. Going to be getting an opportunity to take a look at 300-plus prospects in Indianapolis, get to chat with coaches as well as general managers, front office people, plenty of scouts that are going to be in the vicinity as well. This is one of the biggest weeks on the NFL calendar for all 32 teams. Let's get to the defensive side of the football. As far as scheme fits, today is all about the offensive and defensive line. Flipping the script over to the defensive line. Let's start with edge rushers that would be good fits for Mike Macdonald's defense. And look, there's a lot of talent in this draft class. I think in terms of depth, the interior D-line is probably the strongest group, and running back would be right there as well. But I think that you also got to have a discussion about the depth of this edge rusher class. And I think in terms of top heaviness, this might be the second best position group in this draft class behind the defensive tackle group. There's a lot of guys that have first-round caliber skills at this edge rushing position. And I think there's a number of players that would make sense for the Seahawks as early as round 1. Let's talk a couple guys that I think in the first round would make some sense for the Seattle Seahawks to take a close look at. As far as the first player that pops off this tape for me, when you look at Shamar Stewart's production, he only had 4.5 career sacks at Texas A&M. So that would make you think, why is this guy getting first-round buzz? But when you turn on Texas A&M's tape, this guy just pops. He's 280-plus pounds, but he moves like he's in the 250s. Like, this guy can play as a stand-up outside linebacker. He can play 3-tech. He can play 5-tech. He is incredibly versatile, and we know how much Mike Macdonald values that. But when you turn on some of the clips from the Senior Bowl, Shamar Stewart was one of the players that really popped off the field, and you could see the penetration skills, the elite athleticism. There's a couple plays where he just rocketed off the line of scrimmage, off the snap, and beat opposing tackles. Again, the 3-tech ability is something to watch as well. I'm wondering if this is a kid that just getting him in the right scheme, that he could just absolutely explode, and that maybe Texas A&M just didn't maximize his traits. I think he is somebody at pick 18 that the Seahawks would strongly consider. As for day 2 selections, Jack Sawyer from Ohio State and Princely Umanmielen from Ole Miss. These two guys, I think, are second-round selections, maybe late first. Sawyer is the opposite of Umanmielen, who is not necessarily a top-flight athlete. I'm curious to see how he tests this week. Maybe he ends up being more athletic than what the film suggests, but he is such a tough-minded, high-octane player. He plays to the whistle every single snap, relentless motor, makes a lot of big plays. As we saw in the college football playoff, he seems to just be around the football when it comes loose. He can create fumbles. He collapses the pocket. He can win with power, has some finesse to his game. Jack Sawyer is one on day 2 that I think would be a really good fit as one of the outside linebackers in Mike Macdonald's defense. And Umanmielen from Ole Miss. And if I've said his name 3 different ways, because I have struggled with this last name. This is one of the toughest one in the entire draft class. But I love watching this kid on tape. And at 264 pounds, He'll surprise you in terms of his burst off the line of scrimmage. He is a speed rusher that maybe needs to have a little bit more refinement to his game to have that type of success in the NFL. But he had a big season in Ole Miss after transferring from Florida, and really athletic. He could be one of those freaks that comes out of this combine with numbers that just make your jaw drop. I think that this is one of those guys that absolutely can do that. And I think at his size, there's room for him to blossom into a solid run defender. I like him as an edge with some ability to play some five tech potentially for the Seahawks at that outside linebacker spot. And shifting into the day 3 discussion, Landon Jackson from Arkansas, I actually think is probably a 3rd round pick at this point, maybe late 2nd. Again, this speaks to the depth here, but Landon Jackson's another big bodied edge at 280 pounds that has played outside. He's played 5 tech. He's played 3 tech, another player that has that incredible positional versatility, and he's been really productive for the Razorbacks as well. Again, I think he's a day 2 guy. I've seen some draft boards saying day 3. That would speak to the depth that you have in this class. And maybe the most under the radar player that would have Mike Macdonald excited. And I don't know how under the radar he is after now being in the Senior Bowl, but David Walker from Central Arkansas. This guy at 265 pounds has the play style of a 280-pound defender and the athleticism of a 250-pound defender. He's a very fascinating prospect, and he had great production, albeit at the FCS level last year with 55 pressures, 12 sacks. He is a solid run defender as well. Had some tackle issues last year, but if David Walker comes into Indianapolis and he tests really well, I think this is a surefire day 2 selection. Right now, he is still being listed as a day 3 by most draft experts, but I think he has a chance to be one of the fast risers. Again, there's a lot of FCS talent in this draft class. David Walker would probably be my number 1 FCS prospect on the defensive side of the ball, and I think he would be a really fun fit in Mike Macdonald's defense. Shifting into the interior defensive line, I mentioned this earlier. I think this is the deepest position group in this entire draft. And the running back class is probably second. And that's how good the running back class is. We'll talk a little bit in Tuesday's show about the running back group. But defensive tackles, that is to me the cream of the crop in this draft class. And there's some really fascinating players that Mike Macdonald and John Schneider could consider in round 1. I know they just drafted Byron Murphy last season, but you can never have too much defensive line talent. And there are a few players here that'll be very difficult for the Seahawks to pass over, particularly because I think they'd be great scheme fits for Mike Macdonald. When you're looking at that first round crop, the one that jumps out to me immediately, if Kenneth Grant at 334 pounds, if he's there at pick 18, which I don't know if he will be, there could be 2 Michigan defensive tackles gone in the first 12, 13 picks, and Kenneth Grant being one of them. Kenneth Grant at his size is incredibly athletic, and he could be the Jordan Davis of this draft class. A few years ago, you may remember Jordan Davis going out and running in the high 4.7s at his size. What a freak athlete. I could see Kenneth Grant being the one that has those kind of eye-popping numbers at this combine, and he can play all across the defensive line. That would be a player. And, oh, by the way, he's a Michigan guy. Mike Macdonald's going to be familiar with it. I think Kenneth Grant is a player that would make a lot of sense for the Seahawks. And staying in that round 1, early round 2 discussion, let's talk about Dajuan Walker from Kentucky. And I'm just going to say this. I walked by this kid at the airport a couple days ago. And I have been around a lot of massive dudes covering the NFL. This guy is on another level, 6'7", almost 350 pounds. And you can tell, like, he is the mountain of Game of Thrones. Like, this guy is a massive human being, but he's not your typical big body guy where you're like, that's clearly a nose tackle. This guy can play off edge. He's played 3 tech, 5 tech. You can move him around. He's got some natural leverage issues that he's going to have to work through. He can play too high. But I think that Walker is going to put up ungodly combine numbers for a player of his size. Again, 6'7", almost 350 pounds. Just a huge human being Walker is. I am really curious about his fit in Mike Macdonald's defense. That would be one I could see Macdonald, especially if he's available in the second round. he is not going to be able to pass up on this kid. Even if there are some flaws in his game, you develop him. He has got such rare traits for a player of his size. I think he's going to put him on display in Indianapolis. And really looking at the depth, I got 3 guys on day 3 that I think would be excellent fits in Mike Macdonald's defense. Darius Alexander, who had a really strong Senior Bowl for Toledo. He's not the biggest guy, just a little over 300 pounds, but he's got the ability to play 3-tech and 5-tech positions, maybe some nose tackle as well. He plays bigger than his size. He has penetration skills. He showed that off at the Senior Bowl. Hyper productive for the Toledo football program as well. And then Joshua Farmer from Florida State. There were a lot of players that kind of packed it in when the Seminoles stunk this year. It was one of the biggest collapses I've ever seen in college football. Nearly made the college football playoff the year before, and then this year just absolutely tanked. But this was not one of the kids that gave in. And I think Farmer is a player who has a lot of positional versatility. He's played nose, he's played 3-tech, he's played a little 5-tech. I think he's another guy that would be a really good fit. He is somebody where the athletic traits, they show up some on film. You don't necessarily see it in the pass rush. I am curious to see how well he tests, because he might be the biggest question mark for the testing front of this group of defensive tackles that I'm listing. And then Yaya Black from Iowa. This is a big-bodied 340-pound defensive tackle that plays like he's 295, 300 pounds. He moves really well. I think Black is a early day 3 selection. Still seeing a lot of places tapping him as mid to late day 3. This is one of the most athletic nose tackles I've seen in recent years, with penetrating ability, some pass rushing upside, and the Seahawks have to find a long-term answer at that nose tackle position at some point. Yaya Black is a guy that I think has a chance to have a really strong performance at the combine and make himself some money. If he's not already on the radar for the Seahawks, I expect that he is going to be, because this is a guy that really fits that nose tackle position and Mike Macdonald's defense to a T. As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back for our Tuesday show, I'll be rejoined by Rob Rang, and we're going to be checking out the skill positions for personnel fits on offense, defense, running backs, receivers, tight ends, corners, linebackers, you name it. Tons of fun stuff as we get ready for the workouts here at the Combine. Enjoy the rest of your Monday, and thanks for listening. Go Hawks.